Rise of the Two Popes. Recently on Netflix, there was a movie that was done by Netflix, starring Anthony Hopkins as Pope Benedict and Jonathan Pryce as Cardinal Bergoglio, who is now known as Pope Francis. Netflix has spent a ton of money on this movie, talking about showing the relationship between Bergoglio and uh, Cardinal Ratzinger or Pope Benedict. And so I'm looking at a article from the National Review, but the original article came from First Things, where John Walters wrote an article about how Pope, the Two Popes movie done by Netflix is completely untrue. And so Netflix tries to create a story of the relationship between Pope Benedict and Cardinal Bergoglio before Cardinal Bergoglio became the Pope. It shows a relationship between Pope Benedict XVI and Bergoglio. It shows Anthony Hopkins as this kind of old, crusty, kind of conservative, rigid Pope, and it shows Bergoglio's character as a kind of life giving, breath of fresh air for the Catholic Church, which a lot of people and a lot of Catholics think of these days as Pope Francis. And so, in this movie, this review that was done, the man that did the review points out all the lies that were, told in the movie, and it's a movie for they're trying to make it sensational, they're trying to make it entertaining, and all this stuff was not true that happened in the movie. He points out that Bergoglio did not fly in 2012 to meet Pope Francis uh, when Pope Francis was thinking about retiring. In the movie, it shows the Pope Benedict, and Bergoglio spending a couple days together, getting to know each other. Uh, in the movie, it says that it shows that Pope Benedict told Cardinal Bergoglio that he was going to resign, and he told him that he was no longer fit to be the Pope. And in the movie, it shows him, choosing Bergoglio as the next Pope, kind of giving him a blessing, saying, I'm going to retire and I'm going to give the reins over to you. And so basically, none of this happened. So Bergoglio never went to meet with Pope Benedict. Uh, Pope Benedict didn't spend any time with Bergoglio. He didn't tell Bergoglio that he was going to retire, and he certainly didn't tell Bergoglio that he was going to pick him as his successor or give him a blessing to kind of pass on to the cardinals to vote for him. And if you remember in the selection of the new pope, I think there was a couple of votes that happened. It wasn't just one straight, endorsement of Pope Benedict, and I don't think that even Pope Benedict even chose Bergoglio to be his successor because they are ideologically different when it comes to their views in the church. And so that's where kind of Netflix was going with this thing where, uh, you know, it talks about how, it's how Benedict was an arch conservative and his ways were outdated, his thinking was outdated, but he chose Bergoglio because Bergoglio was this kind of sensitive man, who loves the tango and loves ABBA and football, and is more kind of progressive than Pope Benedict. But you know, in the Netflix movie, it shows that Pope Benedict kind of realizes that his time has gone, and like his ways of the church are not the ways that the church is going, and kind of sees Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, as the future of the church. And so Netflix is trying to kind of bridge this gap between conservatives and liberals in the church, and it shows where shows like a resignation of Pope Benedict to like signs of the times where the whole world is becoming liberal, and I'm going to give my reins over to Pope Francis or Bergoglio because I feel like he's the best fit for our times, and he's kind of surrendering to this liberalism that has kind of infected our world. But um, I feel like it's not. Well, first of all, the whole thing is not true where Benedict chose Bergoglio, because as we know in the Catholic Church, the Pope is selected by the Holy Spirit. Well, that can that can be manipulated, and however that happens. But God is always working in His church, and this whole thing about the conservative and liberal faction of the church is kind of ridiculous in my eyes. But this article just focuses on the lies of the movie. The longer article is from firstthings.com. Great article by John Walters. It's a great, pretty long, but it talks about the different inconsistencies in the movie. But you also have to remember, it's just a movie, and they're trying to politicize it. So